Hey everyone, welcome to episode 5 of the Nerd Talk podcast. I'm your host Nick Leland, and in this series, I just take a few minutes every couple of weeks to recommend a movie for you guys. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Angel Studios' new movie, Cabrini. So this movie tells the true story of an Italian nun, Francesca Cabrini, played by Cristina Delana, who immigrates to New York in the late 1890s in hopes of building homes and charities for people in need. Now, before I get into my actual thoughts on the film, I want to preface one quick thing, which is the studio behind this, Angel Studios, and the director, Alejandro Gomez Monteverde. If I mispronounced that, I apologize. These guys were the ones that are behind last year's movie, Sound of Freedom, which is a movie that's, at best, very problematic given its inaccurate portrayal of human trafficking and the fact that it promotes a man, Tim Ballard, who has lied about saving victims of human trafficking. So I'd argue that, like many, I didn't have the best first impression of Angel Studios, and I don't blame anyone for having skipped this film because of that. But for those who don't know, I work in my local movie theater outside of social media, and we had Cabrini at the start of this month, so I decided to give it a chance, and I was pleasantly surprised by it. And I wouldn't say it absolves Angel Studios and the director's involvement with Sound of Freedom, mind you, but I had a really good time with this, and there's several things I want to touch on with this film. First and foremost was Cristina Delana's performance of Francesca Cabrini. I think she specifically does a great job with showing her drive to help young Italian immigrants like herself who are in New York, and despite the challenges she faces, whether it's the discrimination that she faces or her own personal health problems, she demonstrates this strong desire to bring about change and to help as many people as she possibly can. Now, the rest of the cast, I also think, does a great job. Jeremy Bobb, I think, was well casted as Calloway, who's a local reporter that helps Cabrini get her story out to people. And I liked how it's a small but memorable example of her bringing about change, both by showing someone what it was really like for Italians like her who were immigrating to New York at this time, and also earning a good friend that helps her throughout the film. And this also ties into the second thing I want to discuss, which is how it portrays the history of what it was like for Italians during this point in American history. It shows that America's hatred and closed-mindedness, if you will, towards outsiders isn't some new thing. It's a common trend that we've always seen ever since people came to this country almost 400 years ago. You know, it shows Italians not being treated well and the conditions they live in. Like they mentioned, there's kids living in sewers that Cabrini takes into her orphanage. And at the start of this film, you got this poor kid who can't speak English begging for help from everyone because his mom's dying, and he's just pushing her in a wheelbarrow, and everyone just pretends to not see him. And when he goes to a hospital to beg for help, they just turn him away, or they dismiss him because they don't understand what he's saying. And it's a really heartbreaking opening, but it's also necessary because it shows what Italians in America during this point in our country's history were actually experiencing. Now, the third, and I'd say my biggest compliment I could possibly give Cabrini, is its example of how to make a good and awesome Christian movie. Now, what I mean by this is, you know, since the rise of films like God's Not Dead or Last Ounce of Courage, we've seen an influx of Christian media that, instead of trying to tell good stories or actually promote Christian values, if you will, and I'll explain what I mean by that when I get to a moment, is only really interested in promoting the persecution complex that many American Christians have, whether it's painting anyone who's not a Christian as an evil boogeyman or complaining about being asked to respect people's pronouns or different lifestyles. Many modern religious films are just nothing more than a means for religious people to reinforce their hatred and, again, their persecution complex. So I think it's very refreshing to see a film like this that actually focuses on the teachings of Jesus, that actually focuses on helping the poor, giving to the sick and the needy, and actually tells the true story of someone who didn't just pray and hope things would actually happen. No, what Cabrini did was actually go out and fought the discrimination that she faced. She fought for children who were living in sewers. She fought for Italian immigrants to actually have a good chance in America, for people to actually have proper help that they need. And I'd argue that that's how you get people like me, you know, because I'm an atheist, or people who just aren't religious in general interested in these kinds of films. You don't create fictional boogeymen, and you don't complain about being asked to actually respect people's cultures and lifestyles, but you actually make a good film, and you actually focus on the idea of loving thy neighbor and helping the sick, the poor, and the needy. Which also ties into why I mentioned this film was made by Angel Studios at the beginning, because these guys love to put QR codes at the end of their films to get extra money in their pockets. And it's especially frustrating with this kind of film, you know? And regardless of your personal beliefs, you do have to recognize the irony of making a film about helping the disenfranchised and giving to the poor, and then ending it by saying, give us more money, you know? Regardless of what you think of this film, you gotta be able to recognize the irony. But, you know, regardless of my personal problems with the studio and the director, I again was pleasantly surprised by this film. You know, Christina Delana is excellent as Cabrini and shows her desire to help those less fortunate. This movie is a great example of late 19th century American history, and it focuses on being a good Christian and actually focuses on giving a good message to help those who are in need. And if you do get a chance to see this, it's one I do actually recommend checking out. Now that concludes it for episode 5 of the Nerd Talk podcast. Before I go, I want to thank you very much for listening. It really means a lot. And if you're listening on YouTube, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of the Nerd Talk podcast. And if you have seen this film, please let me know your thoughts on it or your thoughts on the real-life Francesca Cabrini in the comments below. And until next time, my name is Nick Leland. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I'll see you next time.